Wow, okay, so this time you've really outdone yourself with the source material.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, excerpts from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, even a picture of the book cover. This is going to be a deep dive for sure.
It certainly will be. And you know, what's so striking about Frankl's work, especially Man's Search for Meaning, is how he weaves together his own experiences in the Nazi concentration camps with his approach to therapy, logotherapy.
Right, and he doesn't just give us the theoretical or clinical side. He brings in these really vivid, almost everyday moments from the camps, like how much a cigarette could mean, or even finding a rotten potato, things like that. The small things that took on huge significance in that environment.
Exactly, and that really gets to the heart of his argument, doesn't it? That
Right.
the will to meaning, this search for meaning, it's not about some grand pursuit of happiness or avoiding suffering altogether.
It's about finding those little things, those reasons to keep going, even when surrounded by unimaginable suffering.
Absolutely.
Oh.
He argues that it's this innate drive, this will to meaning that truly motivates us, even more so than pleasure or power.
Which is incredible considering he's writing about his experiences in concentration camps. He doesn't shy away from the brutality of it all either, does he? The way he describes being stripped of your identity, reduced to just a number. It's chilling.
The dehumanization was systematic and incredibly brutal. It's hard to even fathom the constant hunger, the violence, the ever-present threat of death.
And yet, even in that environment, he's still observing, still analyzing, like the psychiatrist he was. He even identifies a specific psychological condition, right?
Yes, he calls it barbed wire sickness. It's this psychological response to the constant exposure to brutality, the confinement, the lack of any control.
It's remarkable that he was able to maintain that level of awareness, that ability to observe these psychological patterns in such a horrific environment.
It speaks to his resilience, his determination to find meaning even in the midst of unimaginable suffering.
One of the things that really stuck with me was his description of what he calls the delusion of reprieve.
Tell me more about that.
It's this phenomenon where, even when faced with imminent death, prisoners would cling to these glimmers of hope.
Right, like these little shreds of hope to hold on to, even when all seemed lost.
He talks about arriving at Auschwitz and initially believing it was a transit camp, not an extermination camp, seeing the SS officers who were well-fed and in clean uniforms.
Like their minds are trying to protect them from the horrific reality.
Exactly. And he talks about how even when that delusion was shattered, that need for hope, it persisted.
It's a testament to the human spirit, isn't it? This deep-seated need to believe that things will get better, even when faced with the worst.
Absolutely. But what really struck me was how even those moments of shattered illusion, he describes feeling this strange sense of detachment.
Detachment? Like how so?
He talks about feeling this cold curiosity about what would happen next, as if a part of him was trying to distance himself from the horror of it all.
I think that makes sense, though. It's like his mind, maybe even on a subconscious level, was trying to find a way to cope, to protect itself.
Right, it's like a survival mechanism almost.
Exactly. And it seems to be a recurring theme throughout his experience. This ability to find some emotional distance, to observe and analyze, even in the most extreme circumstances, it's extraordinary.
And then there's the process of being stripped of his identity, reduced to just a number. How did that contribute to the dehumanization he and others experienced?
Well, I think the loss of individual identity was absolutely central to the Nazis' strategy of dehumanization.
It's like they were trying to erase their humanity to turn them into just another statistic.
Exactly. You're stripped of your possessions, your clothes, even your hair. It all chips away at your sense of self, your inherent dignity as a human being.
And then you're given a number, a label, that further reinforces the idea that you're no longer an individual.
Right, and this creates this chilling sense of interchangeability.
Like anyone could be replaced at any moment.
Yeah.
Does he give any specific examples of this?
He does, actually. He talks about accompanying a transport of sick patients, and there was this young man who was terrified.
Why was he terrified?
The young man's brother wasn't on the transport list, and he was afraid of being separated from him. He pleaded with the camp warden to let him stay behind.
Oh, wow. What happened?
Another man agreed to take his place. They literally just swapped numbers.
So the list was all that mattered, not the actual human beings on it.
It's a stark illustration of how the camp system aimed to erase individual identities, to reduce human beings to mere commodities.
It's just heartbreaking. So in this environment, stripped of everything familiar, where did Frankl find meaning? How did he hold on to his humanity?
That's where the will to meaning comes in. Even in that horrific setting, Frankl observed that those who could find meaning in their lives, even the smallest sliver of it, were more resilient, better able to endure.
So it wasn't about avoiding suffering, but about finding meaning within it.
Exactly. He gives these really poignant examples of prisoners finding solace in the image of a loved one, men having these in-depth discussions about the best way to eat their meager bread rations, just tiny acts that gave them a reason to keep going, finding something beyond that immediate suffering to cling to.
He even talks about the significance of a cigarette, right? How something so small could take on such importance.
Absolutely. Cigarettes became like currency in the camps, but for Frankl, the act of smoking, it represented a choice, a tiny act of defiance in a world where almost everything had been stripped away.
He also draws a distinction, doesn't he, between those who smoke their own cigarettes versus those who traded them.
You're right. He noticed that those who held on to their cigarettes or traded them for something they needed seemed to fare better than those who just smoked them right away.
Like they were giving up hope if they smoked their own, but clinging to it if they traded, right?
It's a subtle observation, but I think you're right. It's like even in the face of death, that will to meaning, that desire to find purpose, to make choices, it could persist.
It makes me think about his whole concept of logotherapy, this new approach to therapy that he was developing. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Logotherapy is really centered around this idea that we all have this innate will to meaning, that our primary drive is to find meaning in our lives. And it's about helping individuals discover that meaning for themselves.
So it's not about giving people answers, but about guiding them to find their own answers, their own sense of purpose.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because while he wasn't running therapy sessions in the camps, you can see how his observations and experiences there, his own struggles, deeply shaped logotherapy's development.
Like his concept of the delusion of reprieve, this inherent human need for hope, even when it's based on illusion, how that factors into coping with suffering.
That's a great example. His experiences in the camps weren't just anecdotal. They fed directly into his understanding of the human spirit, of how we cope and find meaning even in the most extreme circumstances.
That's what makes man's search for meaning so powerful. It's not just a memoir. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit
Yeah.
and a call to find meaning, even in the darkest of places.
I completely agree. And that's just the first part. There's so much more to uncover. So moving into the second part of the book, this is where Frankl really delves into the specifics of logotherapy, how it's different from other schools of thought.
Okay, so like, how is it different? I mean, we hear about Freud, Adler, those big names, right?
Right. And Frankl actually calls his approach the third Viennese school of psychotherapy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he saw it as a distinct thing, not just like, oh, I'm riffing on Freud, but a totally different approach.
Exactly, because he felt that both Freud, who really emphasized the will to pleasure, and Adler, who focused on the will to power, they were both missing this really crucial element of the human experience.
Which
It's
is,
the will to meaning, this innate human desire to find meaning in life. And so logotherapy is all about helping patients uncover that meaning in their own lives.
okay, that makes sense, but how? Like, how do you actually help someone discover meaning? Is it like, here's a list of things that could be meaningful, pick one?
It's definitely not that simple. It's not about giving them a prepackaged set of values or telling them what their purpose should be. It's more about uncovering, helping them tap into the meaning that's already there.
Okay, I like that. So it's more like a process of self-discovery.
Exactly. And Frankl outlines three main avenues for this. One is creating work or doing a deed. Another is having a profound experience, like really connecting with another person. And then, of course, there's finding meaning in unavoidable suffering.
That last one is really powerful, especially considering what he went through. It's like he's saying, even when things are really, really bad, we can still find meaning in how we choose to respond.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's a central tenet of logotherapy.
Mhm.
That while suffering isn't a prerequisite for meaning, when it's unavoidable, it actually presents an opportunity for growth.
That reminds me, he talks about tragic optimism, right?
Yeah.
It's not about pretending things aren't awful, but about facing that tragedy head on and still choosing to find reasons for hope.
Exactly. And this tragic optimism, this belief that meaning is possible even in the face of suffering, it's not just some feel-good idea. Frankl argues it's actually crucial for mental well-being.
Okay, so finding meaning isn't just about being happy, it's about psychological health, like having a reason to get up in the morning. But if meaning is so important, why does it seem like so many people struggle to find it?
Well, Frankl suggests that modern society in many ways has eroded some of those traditional sources of meaning. He talks about the rise of what he calls the collective neurosis.
The collective neurosis. That sounds intense, like some kind of society-wide existential crisis.
It is pretty intense when you think about it. He argues that this widespread feeling of meaninglessness is a result of a lot of factors.
Hmm.
Technological advancements, rapid societal changes.
So we're like lost in this sea of progress. How do we get back to that sense of purpose if we feel lost?
Well, Frankl believed that logotherapy, it's not about changing society as a whole, it's about empowering individuals to find meaning in their own lives, regardless of external circumstances. He talks about helping people discover their vocation.
Vocation, does he mean like a job? Or is it more than that?
It's definitely broader than just a job. He uses it to encompass any activity, any relationship, any experience that really gives you that sense of purpose, of fulfillment.
So it could be your job, but it could also be your hobbies, your relationships, how you choose to see the world.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what makes you tick, what makes you feel truly alive and engaged.
I like that. So it's about taking ownership of your own journey, recognizing that we all have the power to create meaning.
Exactly. Frankl was adamant that meaning isn't something that's just bestowed upon us, it's something we create through our choices and our actions.
We talked earlier about love being a source of meaning. How does that fit into this whole logotherapy thing?
Love is huge in logotherapy. Frankl saw it as one of the most powerful ways to find meaning in life. He believed that through love, we're able to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something beyond our own individual ego.
So it's not just about romantic love.
Not at all. It can be. But it can also be the love for a child, a friend, a cause, even humanity as a whole. It's that connection, that feeling of belonging to something larger than yourself.
So it's about transcending that self-centered perspective we can get stuck in and opening ourselves up to something bigger.
Exactly. And for Frankl, that's where real meaning is found, in that act of self-transcendence.
It's funny, we often think of love as something we receive, but he's saying it's about giving, about dedicating yourself to something outside of yourself.
It's a subtle shifting perspective, but a powerful one. It's not about waiting for love to find you. It's about actively choosing to love, to give, to dedicate yourself to something or someone beyond your own ego.
It makes me think about that passage where Frankl describes having those mental conversations with his wife while he was in the camps, even though he didn't even know if she was still alive.
Right. It's such a powerful image. Even in the midst of unimaginable suffering, that connection, that love, it sustained him.
Love as a source of strength and resilience. I love that. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground already. The will to meaning, this idea of the existential vacuum, tragic optimism, love. But I also know that Frankl introduces this unique technique called paradoxical intention as part of logotherapy. What's that all about?
Paradoxical intention is super interesting, especially when it comes to dealing with things like anxiety and phobias.
Okay, because that's what most people think about with therapy, right?
Right. And so many of us, when we're afraid of something, we try to avoid it, right? But Frankl says that by focusing so much on avoiding something, we actually give it more power.
So it's like that saying, what you resist persists.
Exactly. So paradoxical intention turns that on its head. Instead of running from the thing you're afraid of, you almost lean into it.
Wait, so if I'm terrified of spiders, you're saying I should just, hang out with a bunch of spiders?
Well, maybe not with spiders, but the idea is that you would, in a sense, try to will yourself to experience the very thing you're afraid of.
That sounds terrifying and kind of amazing at the same time.
That's the paradoxical part. He gives this great example of a young physician who had this intense fear of sweating. Just the anticipation of sweating would make him sweat even more. It was a vicious cycle.
Oh, I know people like that. It's like, the more you think about it, the worse it gets.
Exactly. So Frankl advised him to, whenever he felt that sweating coming on, to just go with it, to actually try to make himself sweat even more, even to the point of absurdity. Like, look how much I can sweat.
So he was supposed to, embrace the thing he feared most.
Yes. And the funny thing is, it worked.
Wait, really? How?
Because by confronting that fear head on, but with this sense of humor, with this self-detachment, he disarmed it. He broke free from that cycle of anticipatory anxiety that was causing the sweating in the first place.
Wow, okay, so it's like, if you can find a way to laugh at the thing you fear, it loses its power over you.
It's about shifting your perspective, using humor and self-awareness to take away that fear's control.
That's amazing. But I'm guessing it's not quite as simple as just telling yourself, don't be afraid. There's got to be more to it than that, right?
Right. It's not about suppressing those emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about changing your relationship to them.
Mm.
Frankl actually uses laughter as an example. He says you can't just force yourself to laugh genuinely, right?
It's true. You can't just will yourself to laugh. It's got to come from something genuine, something that strikes you as funny.
Right, it has to be spontaneous. And he says that's true for a lot of our emotions. You can't just force yourself to feel them.
Okay, so if we can't just force ourselves to be happy or to suddenly find meaning, how do we cultivate those things? Especially when life throws those curveballs. I mean, Frankel's talking about finding meaning in a concentration camp, which is a whole other level.
It's interesting because even amidst all that suffering, Frankl emphasizes the importance of the present moment.
So not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Exactly. He talks about how meaning isn't something we achieve in some far-off future. It's something we find in the here and now, in the everyday moments.
It's like that saying, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why it's called a present.
I love that. And it's so true, isn't it? Instead of chasing after some abstract idea of future happiness, Frankl's saying we should focus on finding meaning in the experiences we're having right now.
So if we're always looking ahead to some future point where everything will be perfect, we miss out on the meaning that's available to us in this moment.
All right, and he talks about the transitoriness of life, but not in like a depressing way, more like the only things that are really fleeting are the possibilities we don't act on.
So once we actually do something, once we experience something, it becomes a part of us, a part of our story.
Yes, exactly. It's about embracing those moments, however fleeting they may seem, because they shape who we are.
It's like that other saying, right? Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. But what about hope for the future? He talks about that too, right?
He does. He was a big believer in what he called realistic optimism. So not blind faith, but having a vision for the future and holding on to that, even when things are tough.
Didn't he talk about how, even in the camps, he would encourage his fellow prisoners to envision a future where they were free?
Yeah. He talks about discussing plans for after the war, about simple things like enjoying a good meal or seeing their loved ones again.
It wasn't about pretending they weren't in a horrific situation. It was about holding on to that sense of possibility.
Exactly. He calls it tragic optimism, this understanding that even when faced with immense suffering, hope is essential.
But he also cautions against false hope, right? Like, he tells that story about the prisoner who was convinced he would be liberated on a specific date.
Yes, the prisoner had this dream, this incredibly vivid dream that he clung to.
And,
The day came, the day he was supposed to be freed, and he actually got sick and died that very same day.
oh, wow. That's so sad. It's like his hope was shattered right when it seemed like it might come true.
It really highlights the importance of finding that balance between hope and reality, right?
It makes Frankel's emphasis on finding meaning in the present moment even more powerful. It's like even when the future is uncertain, even when we're surrounded by suffering, we can still find reasons to keep going, to choose hope.
And to choose meaning. He talks about finding those flippers of light, even in the darkest of times, those moments of beauty, of connection, of humor.
He talks a lot about humor, actually. Even in the camps, people found ways to laugh.
He does. He even calls it a defense mechanism, a way of coping with the unimaginable.
It's like, for a moment, you could forget about the horrors around you and just share a laugh with another human being.
Right. It's a way of reclaiming a sense of control, of perspective, even if it's just for a brief moment.
He noticed that the people who were able to laugh, to find those moments of humor, they often fared better.
It's like it allowed them to tap into some inner strength, that ability to find something lighthearted, something to smile about, even amidst so much darkness. It's pretty remarkable.
It really is. And he also noticed that, sometimes the people who might have been considered physically weaker, they actually displayed incredible resilience in other ways.
That's right. He actually says that sometimes the best of us did not return. And by that, he doesn't mean physically strong, but morally strong. The people who clung to their values, who refused to let the camps break their spirit.
That's such a powerful observation. It's like those who adapted too well, who became too hardened by the experience, maybe they lost a part of themselves in the process.
It's definitely something to think about. He suggests that those who are used to a rich inner life, people who found solace in their thoughts and their memories, they often had a different kind of strength to draw upon.
That's a good reminder that resilience, it comes in many forms. It's not always about physical toughness. Sometimes it's about that inner strength, that ability to find beauty and meaning, even in the most unexpected places.
And that's really at the heart of man's search for meaning, isn't it? Frankl's whole approach to logotherapy is about helping people tap into those inner resources to find meaning and purpose no matter their circumstances.
It's about recognizing that even in the midst of unimaginable suffering, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning. He talks about living as if we have a second chance, because in a way, we do. Every moment is a new opportunity to choose how we respond to life. It's a powerful message.
It really is, and a timely one, don't you think? I mean, we may not be facing the horrors of a concentration camp, but we all have our own struggles, our own challenges. Frankl's message, this idea that we have the power to find meaning, even in the midst of suffering, it's a universal one.
Absolutely. It's about facing those challenges head on, embracing our capacity for tragic optimism, and never giving up on that search for meaning. Well, I don't know about you, but this has been quite the deep dive.
It has. Man's Search for Meaning, it's one of those books that stays with you long after you finish reading it. Frankl's message is both a challenge and a source of hope, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience, and that the search for meaning is a journey worth taking, no matter our circumstances.
So well said. And on that note, to all our listeners out there, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep seeking out those moments of meaning in your own lives. Till next time.